Welcome to our June Procurement Talk. I'm Sarah Scudder, President of Real Sourcing Network. We are a software and solution provider in the print and marketing services space. Procurement Talks is a monthly series that we host with our partners to bring the procurement community together to collaborate, network, and my absolute favorite, to tell stories. Each month, our group of panelists share their procurement nightmares, train wrecks, and meltdowns. They also reveal the wisdom gained from their mistakes and how they've learned to refine their skills and add more value to their companies. I'd like to thank our sponsors and have each of them briefly share how their companies are innovating in the sourcing space. And with that, Ken, I'm going to go ahead and kick it off with you.
Yeah, hey. Hi, guys. How's everybody doing? This is Ken Bumrick from Worldwide Services, connecting here from Southern California, so hopefully everybody's having a great day. Hey, so just a quick thing on what we do at Worldwide Services. It's easy. We help save our customers time and money by lowering their IT hardware solutions, supply, and services, mainly maintenance, cost. It's an alternative to what the OEM is doing. It's readily available, and if people are really looking to save some money, especially right now, which a lot of customers are calling us on as their budgets are being slashed, let me know, give me a call. We cover everything from Alcatel-Lucent all the way to Zone, as I say, and all the big names in between. So let me know where I can help, guys.
And Ken, what's the jersey behind you?
So I got Arizona on this side, and I got Seahawks on this side, and maybe one day I'll show you everything, and hopefully you don't see my 7-year-old. She's running around upstairs, but that's how we got to do it right now, right? So.
All right, Ken, thanks for joining us.
Okay, guys.
Next, we have Manish. And Manish, are you joining us from an actual office today?
I'm the only one in my office today. Yes.
Deal.
I had to get away from home because I'm feeling a little bit frustrated with just being around the same space. So I had to get out, yeah. But Michigan also opened up. So Monday was our first day for everybody to go back to normal if they want. So yeah, good afternoon, everyone. This is Manish Senta from TechWisen, based in Ann Arbor, Michigan. We are a software consulting and workforce management company that operates in US, Canada, India, Australia. And we are also working in partnership with the sourcing network to understand procurement needs and how companies procure SOW, workforce management. So that's what our company provides. I'm personally based in Ann Arbor, Michigan, went to school at Purdue. So yeah, and we have a beautiful Michigan weather going on lately.
Manish, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, so the format for today's event is a panel. I encourage you to use the chat and Q&A functions at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We typically have pretty lively chat discussions going on throughout our event, so please don't be shy and feel free to banter and put any comments that you would like. We will also have a couple polls for you to complete throughout the panel. Brandon will facilitate and manage those as we'll ask you. They'll pop up, give you a couple minutes to answer, and then we'll go over the responses. Jane Zhang, our panel moderator, will manage the Q&A and ask your questions through the panelists. We already actually did get a couple questions submitted with registration, and those are already loaded up in the Q&A as well. So I'm going to turn things over to Jane so she can introduce herself. But before I do, I want to share a few personal facts about her. First, Jane is an adventurous foodie. That kind of scares me to hear that. She loves eating weird food native to the countries that she visits, and there's nothing that she won't try. She loves hiking and camping. And Jane, I don't know if you guys do glamping, but glamping is kind of a big thing here in Silicon Valley in California now. Jane once did a 5-day backpacking trip across the West Coast Trail, and she's a proud Chinese Canadian. And my favorite of all of the fun things that I know about her is that she's a beginner ukulele player. So sometime we'll have to put her on the spot and have her perform. So with that, Jane, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce yourself and kick off our panel.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sarah. And what a pleasure it is to be here with our fantastic panelists today. I am honored to be here to share this time with you guys. And I'm actually happy to say that none of you will, your ears will be happy to hear that I'm not going to be performing any sort of ukulele tunes today. Give us some more time to understand more than 4 chords, and I promise you there will be a performance at some point. Yes, so I am the co-founder of Etch Sourcing. We are a Calgary, Canada-based boutique strategic sourcing and category management consulting firm. We specialize in everything from strategy to full managed services outsourcing to sustainable procurement. So at our fundamental core, I guess we really identify ourselves as big procurement nerds. We're very, very passionate about all things procurement, all things strategic sourcing, which is why I'm super excited to be here today to be talking about the panel that we have here today. So we have an amazing list of panelists today that I will let them all introduce themselves eventually as we get to the questions. But what we really want to talk about is our theme for the panel today is really around dealing with unexpected and unprecedented crisis and challenges. You know, we all know what the current environment is right now, and so many organizations have encountered challenges that have really been unprecedented before, given the current situations that have happened in our economy and in our world as a whole. So what we really want to do here today is to put those spotlight a lot of those challenges and those great stories that our panelists have here to share with us today, and to really get from the audience as well other challenges and other things that you want to hear from us. So with that being said, you know, I'd like to really start off with some stories from the panel of past experiences. So Jill, I'd like to ask you, you know, what is the scariest or most shocking experience that you've had so far in your career?
Thanks, Jane. So just a little bit about myself. I'm the founder and CEO of ProcurePro Consulting and a new company that's called ThriveX Consulting. ProcurePro specializes in procurement as well as implementation of technology. We're based out of Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and we service the small and medium-sized business community who don't have their own procurement or IT department. That's a great question, Jane. Probably, I'd have to say, the most scary experience I had was actually leaving a near 30-year career to leap off the corporate ladder to start my own business. We're going to be celebrating 7 years, in fact, this month.
Woohoo! Congrats.
Thank you. And I have to say that I had reached a point in my life where I was reaching a level of success, and I was finding that there was just something more that I wanted. And so I've always been so passionate about business and entrepreneurs. And so I decided to leap off the corporate ladder, and it was incredibly scary. I cashed in my retirement and decided that I was going to take that leap. And so it's not for everybody, definitely not for the faint of heart. I wake up in a cold sweat quite often. Certainly with COVID and the crisis that's happening around the world, it's certainly not the best time to launch a business. And I just decided to launch another business in the middle of it all, as well as my first book. So I'd say that right now is probably one of the most scary times for all of us, myself included.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jill. And I can definitely relate to, you know, I think every entrepreneur can relate to that world of, is it the right decision that we're making by jumping off that corporate ladder here? Our next question, and Joseph, I will let you give your introduction, but you've got an amazing history. I'd love for you to tell me about a time in your career where you've really had to deal with a crisis, or something that's really had a huge impact on your supply chain. There's so many companies right now that are dealing with changes and challenges that are really unprecedented. And one of the things I've always said, you know, is when Coca-Cola posts an article about how their supply chain is impacted, you know, everyone's supply chain is impacted. So can you tell me about a time that you faced that type of challenge?
Yeah, absolutely. First off, just a quick way of introduction. My name is Joseph Martinez. I've been in and around the supply chain world for about 30 years. I am currently the Chief Procurement Officer for Bank of New York Mellon, based in New York, but today I'm actually coming to you live from Arizona. That said, I want to thank both Jane and Sarah for inviting me to the panel discussion today. And when I think about it, a terrific example of one such crisis in my career came about on March the 11th of 2011. And that was when I was working in APAC and living in Singapore. I'd been on a flight from Kuala Lumpur back to Singapore. Not really a long flight, it's about a 45-minute flight. And as I landed and stepped off the plane, my phone just started to kind of blow up, okay, from incoming calls from numerous folks, including our emergency response team. And, I was like, what's going on? And what really happened was about 30 minutes before, about 15 minutes after I took off from KL, there was a massive earthquake and tsunami that hit Japan. Now, we had a pretty sizable operation in Japan in multiple locations, and so that created a big issue for us. So, started to work with our emergency response team, really starting to think about, what is it that we needed to do to really ensure the safety and soundness of our employees, start to take a look at our operations, et cetera. And so over the next couple of days and / weeks, really started to try and figure out how do we, and to support our operations in Tokyo. So we put together our emergency response organization, our real estate team, our security, travel, procurement, my third-party risk management team. And we literally worked around the clock for the next couple of weeks, specifically trying to make sure that we were securing food, that we were making sure that we were getting water into a shelter-in-place environment. We had about 1,400 employees that were in the sheltering in place. We even shipped in sleeping bags, which we shipped in from Hong Kong and from our India operations centers. And we worked, with our third parties locally, globally, regionally, in order to make sure that what we were doing was really going to help not just our employees, not just our clients, but the families where we could. And so one of the big things that we had to do is we had to relocate our trading and operations from Tokyo to Osaka, which required some regulatory dispensation. We had to go through that whole process. We actually had to import satellite phones into Tokyo because all of the infrastructure was down for a period of time. And so, we were really working to find and help our employees, their families. And we actually had a number of different employees that had been there either on vacation or on business. We had to identify them, find them, and help evacuate them back to the UK, back to US, Singapore, to Germany, et cetera. And so as we were going through this, it was a true crisis. A lot of the regular commerce type activities just came to a close. And we're like, how are we gonna pay for things? How are we gonna get things taken care of? So we had to work with our corporate card and procurement card provider to increase through appropriate controls, the card limits for the Japan COO, for myself, to ensure that we could start to make payments and start to make sure that we were securing all of what we needed. And so one of the big things that happened was we had our active data centers. One was in Tokyo and one was about 500 miles outside of Tokyo. And both of them were impacted by the earthquake. One of them was impacted and destroyed by the tsunami. So we needed to really be working to reroute the infrastructure into other bank data centers. And so we had to work obviously with the regulators and with compliance and making sure that everything that we were doing was actually going to help us to actually think through how we were going to survive through this process. And as we were doing this, we were able to, after a number of days, fly in additional support in the form of team members that went in to help with that process. And so I sent several team members from my team, and eventually I went myself to make sure that we were helping with a lot of these critical infrastructure activities. Now, the impact on the supply chain was quite significant from both the business operation, from personnel, as well as our colleagues. And so we had to work with third-party logistics companies like DHL, FedEx, and local logistics companies to move equipment, to move personnel from point A to point B, in order to be able to make sure that we were effectively, helping to meet our requirements from an operations perspective. And so this lasted for a number of weeks, and it was really one of those inflection points in your career where it makes you really start to think and say, how we have to really be very, very cognizant of how important BCP or business continuity plans are. And when we're working with our critical suppliers from a resiliency perspective, and we need to make sure that we really understand the difference between partnership and, a contractual relationship with these third parties that we rely on in order to continue. So there were some lessons that I learned in that crisis that are very applicable to the current COVID-19 pandemic that we're dealing with. Because of this experience that I went through, we were able at the current bank that I work at to proactively put in place measures early to ensure that we didn't have a disruption in our operations. As an example, a lot of confidential things, but this one's pretty unique. We put in amendments with our third-party service providers to allow them to work from home. We did this in February, and we worked with the appropriate internal controls, HR, compliance, risk, third-party, our CISO, our IT organizations, et cetera. And what this resulted in was our ability to be able to actually, when the work from home hit, whether it was in Europe, whether it was in the US, et cetera, we were prepared for it, and we've been able to kind of continue pretty seamlessly through that. So if I hadn't gone through that type of an experience before, understanding what we needed to do from a supply chain, I think it would have been difficult. So there were a lot of learnings that I was able to apply, and looking back at it, made some lifelong deep friendships with a number of different individuals as we went through that, kind of a trial by fire. So that's kind of the crisis that I thought I would elaborate.
It's a wonderful story. Thank you so much, Joseph. And I think it's really interesting because during times of crisis, that's where procurement really has an opportunity to shine in ways that we haven't necessarily been considered before in organizations. I mean, during COVID, the number of procurement individuals that I personally know from clients and from people that we've worked with who stepped up to with sourcing of thermometers, of, face masks, gowns, even helping frontline organizations as far as pro bono consulting goes to help them find the right suppliers and to apply that procurement process has been absolutely amazing, which is just so inspirational to see how our industry comes together. And that actually leads us to our first poll that I know a lot of you may have gotten on your screens. So the first poll is really around how scary and challenging is it right now to be a procurement professional in the current market space? Please feel free to answer, and then we'll consolidate those responses. Brandon's going to be facilitating that as we go through. And we'll actually take a question from the audience here right now. So question here is how one can implement efficient procurement processes in an e-commerce FMCG retail online business. So considering the current COVID-19 situation, which has highly affected the product's production issue and the logistics issue. And I actually open that up to the panel floor for any of the panelists if you guys would like to jump in on that question. Everyone's super excited about it.
Well, it's a very specific question, and it's a question that I really don't have any expertise in that particular industry. My background has really been around financial services, but 1,000 years ago in a different life, I actually owned a business. And so, as I think about this, I think, whether there's a pandemic or not, you're going to have sound infrastructure. You're going to have a good marketing plan. You're going to have to really leverage the network that you've developed prior to launching your business in order to be able to be impactful and effective and to be able to generate the type of revenue that you need in order to survive at this point. But for the specific industry that you're talking about, sadly, I don't have any expertise in that, so I can't opine on that. But I think generally there's a lot of practicality that can go across regardless of what sector you're in.
Maybe I could jump in, Jane, because I do have actually relevant experience in implementing ERP systems and digitizing businesses. So in the retail sector specifically, I think one of the things you should first and foremost do is actually secure assistance from someone on the panel or someone locally to you who can actually help you define what it is exactly that your business needs. don't jump to a solution without truly understanding what your business needs are today, but also for the future. So you want to be able to have something that can scale with your business. And so having somebody who can actually help you through that process to define what you need. And then any sourcing professional would tell you that you need to do your research, figure out whether or not a best in suite solution, meaning an fully integrated solution offered by a provider, such as an example, Zoho is a solution that we actually help implement for our clients. It's specifically geared towards small and medium-sized businesses, and it has scalability. So once you've actually done your research and defined your requirements, assess which one best meets those requirements, and then when you're implementing, ensure that you have help so that you can install what you need when you need it, and you're able to actually glean the most value out of the solution that you ultimately do choose. Hopefully that was helpful for you.
Wonderful. Thank you both for that. So next, let's talk about patterns and learning from history. So you all have such a depth of experience, and I would really love for you to share some of the broader lessons that you've learned from past experiences. So Sherry, I'll go to you with this next question. Have you found any common themes or contributors when it comes to projects going off the rails and derailing from as planned?
Absolutely. I am. So thanks, Jane, and thank you to Jane and Sarah for having me today. Super excited to be here. I'm not calling from Jamaica. I'm actually calling from Bolton, Ontario. That's where our headquarters is here at Husky Injection Moldings. So I am the Director of Global Supply Chain. I just celebrated my 1-year anniversary actually with Husky on the 10th of June. Thank you so much. Time flies when you're having fun. Since joining, my scope has actually expanded my scope of responsibility. So I manage both the indirect procurement or non-production spend team, they call it here, as well as the global sourcing team. So I have the honor of leading 30 people currently today, which is growing quickly across the globe in Shanghai, Luxembourg, Canada, and the US. I've got a passion for all things supply chain and procurement, and also wine, which you may have seen in the write-up for this talk today. Also a huge ambassador for empowerment of women in business, and a diversity and inclusion specialist as well. So now to the question. As far as trends go, absolutely. I think the first one that comes to mind is communication breakdown, which is a common problem you see, across everything, not just supply chain. But I think maybe a failure to seek to understand and making assumptions based on your previous experience, or maybe you've worked with one particular client or internal customer who was in IT, and you tried to use the same model with your finance partner. One size does not fit all in this case, and size does matter. So I think that's one that I've seen for sure. The other one, which is related to that, is understanding the true business need of the customer or client that it is that you're trying to serve. So often in procurement, or historically, there's always been a, focus is always on cost, and that's all that matters, and get the lowest price. But that's not always the value driver or the objective, depending on who it is that you're servicing. Definitely one of the pain points that comes up is the rate of involvement or lack thereof. I think all of us in supply chain and procurement can speak to how we're often brought in at the last minute. We're brought in to fight the fire, we're brought in to save the day, just thrown to the lions and get in and get it done. I think we can all agree that if we're involved early on in the project cycle or the sales cycle, then we can add the most value. But I find that that causes huge problems in itself, because it takes time for you to get up to speed and fully understand what the situation is, and where you can help and add value. What else? Let's see. Too many hands in the cookie jar, or not the right hands. And I say that because often there's engagements or projects where you can have a room full of people, but it might not be the right resources to actually add value to the project. I've seen that a lot throughout my career. So really, again, getting to the root of what it is that you're trying to accomplish, what's the objectives, what are the value drivers, can help you determine who the subject matter experts are that you need to have included. And this one is, I can tell you guys about this over a glass of wine maybe one day, but the supplier relationships, and depending on how your organization is structured and who manages those relationships, can sometimes be very dangerous. You can maybe get roped into something where it's a very damaged relationship that you and your team have not managed, and you have to dive in and try to, whether it's a negotiation or you need their help with delivery expedition, whatever it is. But you're dealing with someone that has been burned and is not happy with you or your organization. Those are just a few that I've seen pop up again and again throughout my career.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Sherry. And I think it's really interesting. We can all relate. I mean, working in procurement, whether you've worked in procurement for a year versus 10 years versus 20 years, you're still seeing the same trends and same patterns that are happening that, really get caught in terms of pitfalls. So we have the first poll results in. So it looks like nobody is terrified. So that's good. No one is terrified. Yes. We're all a little bit,
right.
There's a majority who's a little bit nervous, but I think that's very normal in today's current environment. And, for the people that have it completely under control, fantastic. We're cheering for you guys to share that knowledge with the rest of us. Awesome. So I've got a question now for you, Larry. What can you do if something fails outside of your control? And we talked a little bit about, failures, things outside of our control, some common pitfalls. What do you typically do if something fails that is completely outside of your control?
Awesome. Thanks, Jane. Just a little bit about me, I guess. I'm Larry. I'm here calling from, I guess, my one-year-old's bedroom. And it's nice. There's a crib behind me, or actually in front of me. And I currently work for the Liquor Control Board of Ontario, which is a Crown Corporation or government-owned retail monopoly of beverage alcohol. And I mostly purchase IT there as a procurement specialist. And yeah, I'm happy to share the answer to this question of what can I do if something fails that's outside of my control. Well, one thing I'd like to do is I'd like to take responsibility for the actions that are within my control first. And then the second thing is I also want to take responsibility for things that are sometimes outside of my control, because I think people are realistic that, they're actually not really going to blame you if things are outside of your control. But if you take ownership of it, I think people are more likely to relate to the problem that you want to solve. Certainly you don't want to be driven over by the bus or throw someone under the bus, because that rarely has fruitful outcomes. So yeah, the first action I would take is to assess the situation to the best of my ability. I want to take a hold of who the impacted stakeholders are, whether they're business partners, whether they're suppliers, project management, those individuals who are involved with the problem or challenge that we're facing. And then I want to complete a written summary of the facts or where I think the status lies across the challenge that we're facing, or what's fallen off the rails. And then I want to communicate that out in a written format so that people can see clearly, what I think the issues and obstacles we need to face. And then obviously if I've captured something wrong, they can, tell me quickly or reply to me saying that, hey, it's actually something else. Okay, great. So now I've got a complete picture. After this summary is completed, I want to develop an action plan with my manager or director or somebody to seek resolution to some of the problems that we're facing. So yeah, that's what I'd start to do. And then after that, once I get buy-in from them, I'd like to find the right stakeholders, or sorry, find the right subject matter experts, or the people that can actually solve the problem. So typically the people that can solve the problem are not part of the stakeholders that are involved at the outset. They're typically other agents or other parties that we're going to need, you know, subject matter expertise from, whether it's IT or whether it's HR or someone else that isn't the bottleneck, but has some of the resources that we need to solve for. All right. Oh boy, there goes my notes. All right. Okay. And then, okay. After I find everyone, I also want to find the people that can make decisions. So the people that can make the decisions and have the authority to make these decisions, these are the people that I want to approach, and then have a clear escalation path if they're not the person that can make a decision. And then to you know, that's how we get things resolved, is making decisions. So the more decision makers you find, the better off you are. Right. Other things you can do when things fall apart that are outside of your control. I've got 4 things here, other things. One, I need to understand the escalation path for the supplier or business partner. So if I don't know who to escalate to from my business side or for the supplier, it oftentimes can lead to slowing down the resolution. Depending on what you find, the situation you find yourself in, you'd want to plan for contingency measures or understand what contingency measures you have or haven't in place. And it's okay if you don't have a contingency, because you can't, you know, formalize a plan for every single outcome, because that would be inefficient and likely drive you crazy. Yeah. All right. The third thing would be have an understanding of warranties and limited liability for the product or service that you've acquired. And lastly, know where your contracts are, or who holds them, because I try not to negotiate by contract, because it's often unproductive, because once the legalese gets involved, legal counsel typically, you know, says their legal counsel or my legal counsel will say or interpret the contract in this fashion, and it can just generally slow down the resolution. So if I don't have to negotiate by contract, I prefer not to. But you know, if you don't have a choice, well, that's that. And that's pretty much wraps it up, what I would do when things fail outside of my control.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Larry, for that detailed and comprehensive answer. I think it's very important a lot of times to make sure, you know, that we're all on the same page, we're all talking about the same thing when it comes to things that have fallen out of our control. So I actually have an audience question here. Maybe I'll direct this one to both yourself, Larry, as well as Sherry here. What advice would you give a brand new supply chain consulting company who has supply chain expertise, but is struggling with finding people that are anxious to find supply chain savings?
Do you want to go first, Sherry?
Sure. Thank you, Larry.
All right. Throw you under the bus.
No worries. Yeah, so I guess I would encourage them to attend events like this. Network. I think the supply chain community is a very collaborative community, and we're normally very quick to, even if we don't have an immediate need, to share and pass on contact information of people and organizations that we come across that we think could add value to others. So that would definitely be a recommendation that I would have.
Awesome. I guess for me, I've never started my own supply chain consulting practice, and I guess I have a trouble with I guess that area, just because I'm not really focused on supply chain savings as a procurement person. Like I am, like as a second or third measure, but I'm really focused on value driven or value creation. What does that look like for the stakeholders? Because I find cost savings in general it's diminishing marginal diminishing returns. As you continue to try to find them, you're gonna, like you'll always find them if you look hard enough. But I think the closer you are to your stakeholders and finding out what their strategic objectives are and helping them get on their way to whatever the outcome they want to achieve is the best way to create value in procurement or in supply chain. And how you can do that as a new corporation is just putting yourself out there and letting people know that this is what you're about, and that you're about helping people and show up. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would add to that too, to get some success stories under your belt as well, right? I think we've talking about storytelling today. I think nothing is more effective than being able to tell a good story about a client that you helped, what their issue was, and in this case, if it's cost savings, what you were able to save them and how you did it.
Absolutely. I think that's awesome. Thank you both so much for that. So as procurement, we all wear so many hats, and we always make the joke, we're doing everything from project managing to herding cats to sometimes I close my eyes and I have legal contracts memorized like the back of my mind. I feel like I can close my eyes and just write out an entire legal contract from memory. So I'd like to hear from you guys some instances of dealing with area-specific challenges. So Joseph, I'd like to go to you next with this question. So tell me about a contractual breach that was really unexpected or caused you to have to work across multiple internal departments, global alignment with stakeholders and regulators, and something that's really caused a lot of legal challenges.
I think I got a story just for you talking about this. I can't give you a lot of the underlying details for obvious reasons, but I was running the supply chain in Asia Pacific for a large global bank when our data center supplier in Hong Kong sent us a letter informing us that they would be demolishing the physical building that we had our data center in at the end of the year. And that basically gave us like 8 months to kind of figure out what we were going to do. Now keep in mind, it typically took us about 18 months to do a data center migration. So this was a big issue for us, right? And so I remember in the actual letter when I got it, they said we are going into deliberate breach. I'd never heard anybody actually send something telling you that they were going into deliberate breach. So as you can well imagine, that created a shockwave in the company. Okay, I'm talking everywhere from Hong Kong, regional headquarters in Singapore, all the way back to Germany and New York. And sat down with the supplier, asked them what was going on, and they're like, the land that your building is currently on is much more valuable than the rent that we're getting from you guys. So, too bad for your luck. We're letting you know that we're demolishing this thing at the end of the year. So I got together with the CEO from Hong Kong and the CIO, and we assembled a team to think how we were going to approach this. We had the head of real estate, legal, et cetera. And so what we wanted to do is we worked with legal to say, can we get an injunction immediately to try and kind of stop this, right? And we started to look through from a procurement third-party risk management perspective to look for alternatives in the market. Okay, now IT and real estate obviously we're going to be driving a large part of that program, but as we were really looking at this, what we're trying to figure out was how do we actually mitigate this without creating an enormous disruption to our franchise, right? So thankfully, about 6 months prior to that, we had in supply chain had conducted a alternative data center market scan, and this had been driven because of some work that we were doing out of China, and work that we were doing based on some regulations in Indonesia. And so we had looked across Asia Pacific. We had looked in each of the markets, and we actually had conducted a very specific market study in Hong Kong. So we kind of dusted off that report. And as we were doing parallel negotiations with the supplier to make sure that we weren't being kicked out, we began to really process seriously and look for alternative sites. And had we not done that on the front end, it would have really been probably a pretty bad outcome. But we refreshed that market scan. We started to take a look at the locations, and we just were lucky enough that we were able to find a new site that we were going to have to build on. That was basic. It was already a structure, but in terms of fitting it out, it was about 500 meters from the Hong Kong Stock Exchange building where their data center was. So for us, that was like a blessing in disguise because of from low latency trading, we were actually connected to them, right? So for our service, it was going to work. From a pop and a hop perspective, we were right there. So we worked to really start thinking about how we could do a migration, a fit out, et cetera. And we actually had to to really accelerate how we were actually going to do this. And we had to reimagine the art of the possible. We had, in Japan, we had certain things going on. In Singapore, where we actually had to divert some of the kit that was going to go into those data centers into this one, all at the same time trying to negotiate with this particular supplier to make sure that we were going to be able to do this. So we were able to secure favorable terms from the old data center provider, and we ended up with the modern state data center, which is currently still in use today. But it did require us to go in there and really make sure that they understood the imposition that their breach was causing to us, and to really make sure that we had an ability to not just enforce an injunction if we wanted, but to really kind of lock them up in court for several years, which was going to, again, create an issue for what they were trying to do from a real estate development. And so ultimately, it was one of those areas where we took a very bad situation, turned it into a great situation, and helped to offset a lot of those costs through the process. So not all breaches are bad at the end, and it wasn't a security breach; this was a breach of contract.
That's wonderful. That those are the best stories where you start with a problem that just looks absolutely unsurmountable, and working together with all the different organizations, you just tackle it one step at a time, and your end result coming out of that is better than what you initially thought it could have ever been when you first got that letter. I'm sure that must have been a shock. All right. So Larry, I have a question for you now. So contingent labor procurement. This is a super highly political area of spend. We know this definitely has a lot of implications. There's definitely a lot of sensitivities around that. It deals with people. How do you deal with procurement in this area when it doesn't go as planned?
That's a great question, Jane, and I'm going to try my best to answer it in a moderately tactful manner, hopefully. And well, contingent labor for me, again, it's always felt strange as the organization is trying to look to fill gaps or acquire skills to complete a project or initiative. And this is often accomplished through contingent labor, which the organization wants to use to find a balance where you're trying to treat this service as a commodity, contingent labor, so basically without feelings. And then you also want to do kind of the right thing or the human thing, so with feelings. So I'm often conflicted with contingent labor procurement myself, but here goes. So across your business stakeholders and finance, like various people across the organization are able to separate these two elements to varying degrees. And luckily I'm just the facilitator in procurement of these initiatives, and I don't have to make the decisions really on the ground with the individuals about money and about the people and that stuff. But being the facilitator is still sometimes a little dicey. So yeah, so contingent labor can go off the rails when the requirements gathering is incomplete, or if there's a misunderstanding of what the outcome or end state of the resource or the managed service or contingent labor type activity needs to look like. So one instance, many moons ago, when the business wanted to hire a project manager to lead a digital transformation. So we have the typical requirements, like they wanted the PMP certification, they wanted the experience, leading a digital transformation, expertise with change management and organizational behavior, or some elements of organizational behavior, and these qualifications. And so they went out to market and they found someone like this with all the qualifications, and they checked all the boxes, and they did their references, and they hired them. Great. But when they were onboarded, the business wasn't happy with the resource that had been chosen, and the resource wasn't exactly thrilled with the project, because as it turned out, the project was a little bit less about digital transformation and a little bit more about migrating manual processes to SAP. So a little bit less strategic and a little bit more tactical in terms of gathering the people to make this SAP a reality. So although the SAP was mentioned in the job requirements and the duties of the framework of the job description, it wasn't well captured in terms of the amount of time that would be devoted to this resource. So the lesson I learned was that you always want to ask for an expectation or quantifiable value of effort as it relates to the skill set or responsibility for the managed service provider or for a staff augmentation type resource. So you want to potentially break down by percentages of each deliverable or work effort area. So areas like planning or execution, project management, administration, or any other major areas that the business wants to focus on to alleviate some future misunderstandings. I think that's all I have for my notes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Larry. And Joseph, do you have anything you'd like to add to that piece?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been doing professional services for a long time. Contingent labor just happens to be one of those areas and activities, as Larry was so rightly pointing out, where there's often contention relative to what's going on. And when you think about this and you think about contingent labor programs, you need to look at it in terms of the tools, in terms of whether you're going to do direct sourcing versus having a managed service provider, and then whether the work that you're going to be hiring should really be contingent labor or should it be statement of work. And this is important because when you start to think about it from a risk perspective, okay, if you have a statement of work that is fixed price, that is milestone driven, that has essentially an acceptance component to it, what you're doing is you may be paying a little bit more, but you're shifting the risk of the outcome to the supplier. And when you go down the contingent labor path, what you're actually doing is you're accepting 100% of the risk. What's going to happen is you get to the end of that project or that program where you've brought somebody in who has no real deliverables to give you, and they don't hit them, you just keep paying and you keep paying, or you swap out that resource for another one. So you got to think about that, because a lot of times people are saying, okay, well, I really don't want to do statement of work or fixed price. I think time and materials makes more sense because it gives me more flexibility. And I would say you need to really think about it in terms of outcomes. And so you're going to say, okay, sure, if I don't really have a defined scope in that initial phase, it makes sense to have contingent labor at that point while you're defining it, time and materials, right? But once you've locked that scope down, then what you should be able to do is you should be able to get it into a fixed price statement of work with deliverables, with acceptance, and drive forward. Now, a lot of times people are going to tell you, well, it's a multi-phase program. And what they want to do is they become enamored with whoever came in for the first phase. And you got to think about that and say, well, if they're really doing their job in creating the deliverables on the front end that we're paying them for during the time and materials phase, I should be able to take that back out to market and bring anybody else in if they actually did that. Because it comes down to knowledge transfer, acknowledgement, and really understanding, where you're going. But people become enamored, they literally do, with either a firm or with resources, okay? And so I think as you think about the whole contingent labor space, it really should be for a finite period of time where you're filling a need for a very specific period, and then you move forward. Somebody's out on maternity leave, or you have a very small project that you don't really need to hire a full-time employee for. That makes sense. But as soon as you start to think about the more concrete deliverables that you need more from a programmatic perspective, I would say you got to think through, do you really need contingent labor, or are you better off with either an FTE, full-time employee, or getting a consulting firm, or getting a statement of work, even if it's with these contingent folks, so that you're reducing your risk. My 2 cents.
Awesome. Absolutely awesome.
Wonderful. Well, we've got a question from the audience. And again, I will direct this one to yourself, Joseph, and Larry. Larry, you first. What if there is a monopoly of a supplier? So like a Pepsi or Coca-Cola, how can we negotiate on the costing perspective where the seller has the advantage on his product, which has a good public demand, and you have to go for a vendor given cost? How can supply chain procurement help to solve these issues?
Although I haven't had really, well, that's not true. Okay. I think that the one thing is if the cost is the cost and they're not willing to budge, I guess what else can they give me if they can't give me a price reduction because of whatever reason? I can't escalate it any further up the chain, down the train. What else could they potentially give me, I guess, is what I'm looking for as the consumer or buyer of that product, whether it's Pepsi or Coke. Is there any marketing dollars that can help spin up the advertising of their product, or is there any additional you know, can they put my company logo on something of theirs? Or is there some opportunity to do a co-branding exercise, event-based, to raise both profiles? Some sort of other elements beyond the cost of the good is what I would look for, I think, and to determine, you know, goodwill and, you know, obviously those things. Yeah.
Wonderful.
I
Joseph?
think those Larry, very sound advice. When you think about it, there's a couple of things that you can do, and I'll give you, for instance, I had the opportunity a number of years ago to help out with actually fitting out a casino. And one of the things that we were looking at was we were being put into a situation where there was a particular supplier that knew that they were kind of a sole, or they thought themselves as a sole source. I thought of them as kind of, yeah, maybe they might be a single source. And so I looked for alternatives in the market, and we did a couple of things. One of the things that we did was we went out and we looked at where we might be able to help in emerging markets to get somebody to compete against them. Okay, and so what we did was we found a couple of alternative suppliers, and then what we did was we ran a reverse auction. Okay, and so you're saying, well, why are you going to do that? Well, you do that because what it does is it starts to drive the competition down. And if the quality is similar, even though there may be a monopoly, and you've found a new niche supplier in a developing country, it has an incredible effect. So at the end, we were able to dramatically reduce the cost associated with what the product was actually going to be. And part of the point that Larry talked about was, at the end, the way they justified it to their management was the goodwill that they were getting from the partnership. They wanted to be a referenceable client. They wanted, when people walked in, and there are tens of thousands of people that go into this facility, they wanted them to be able to look at that and know that that was their brand. So what you're doing is you're creating competition. I think another thing that you should be able to do is, if you're encountering a situation like that, is there's something called a Japanese auction. I don't know how many of you in the audience know what that is, but for those of you that are suppliers, close your ears. But in a Japanese auction, there is one participant. So it would be the monopoly company essentially bidding against themselves. Not really commonly used, but it's something that can be done. And then alternatively, it may require you to go back to your stakeholders and work with them and really challenge the fact that they need to have this specific thing. So that there's really the opportunity for you to kind of open the aperture and rethink, why am I putting myself in a situation where I can only go to one specific supplier? That's not really a very good long-term strategy. Now, they talked about Coke versus Pepsi or whatever. Those are both carbonated beverages. So at the end of the day, yeah, they may have a brand that is considered a monopoly, right? Because you can only buy Coke from Coke or one of their distributors. But at the end of the day, look at what the underlying product is. What they're doing is, it's marketing that is actually driving the sales for what you're doing. What they're actually delivering to you is carbonated beverage. Okay, and so take it and decompose into its underlying components what you're actually being perceived as a single or sole source, and then use that to help challenge and to help to seek alternatives for what you're doing. There are very, very few things that are actually sole source. Now, there are some that are very common, right? You can only buy an IBM Z series mainframe from IBM, right? They're the guys that make it. But you can just as easily go to some of the other Hitachi or Mitsubishi or somebody else and take a look for an alternative solution. You may not be able to buy a Z, but you may be able to find something else. So you got to be willing to look at that and understand that sometimes it's not going to be possible because you have standards that you have to meet. But if you peel the onion back far enough, hopefully at some point as those standards were being developed, there was some sort of competition that was put in place. So just my perspective as having done this more than a day.
Wonderful. Thank you both. And Joseph, you speak to my procurement nerd heart when you say auctions. one of I know the stories I've told Sarah before is I've actually been one of those people who've made a bowl of popcorn and sat down and watched a reverse auction live. It's very fun. If you ever have like 30 minutes, half an hour, you want to sit down and watch, it's very fun to watch your suppliers at a reverse auction. Fantastic. So we've had some amazing stories about overcoming challenges, and that's one of my favorite parts of procurement. I'd love to hear now from the panelists about some of your personal positives. And Jill, I'll start with you. So what is your favorite part of supply chain or procurement, and why?
My favorite, absolutely without question, is the negotiations. I love negotiations. It's my favorite part, and if I get to participate in anything with my team, it's always the negotiations part of it. I think it's the part where you get to use both your left brain and your right brain. The strategy part is really about defining your baseline, coming up with the should cost analysis and all of the analytical elements. But then there's the creativity, which, you know, coming up with a creative solution to be able to satisfy both parties, because it shouldn't be a win-loss. It should be both organizations are satisfied in some way. So that creativity and problem solving, I find also really rewarding and enjoyable.
Wonderful. So now I'd like to get a little bit fun here. What about the most hilarious experience you've ever had?
I've had quite a few. I have to say that probably the most hilarious was I was negotiating a major outsourcing deal, and we were at the negotiations table with IBM. And I had, I think, 2 or 3 people on my left who were part of my team, and I had 2 or 3 people on my right, and IBM in front of us. And we created our strategy, and we knew exactly what leverage points we were going to use, and we had our links and trades, what we wanted for what we were willing to give, and we were going to use the element of surprise, et cetera, et cetera. So there was a point at which I decided I was going to instill some emotion to make some point. So I dramatically decided I was going to slam my book, and I was going to storm out of the room. And so I did, and I said, "We've nothing further to talk about." And I left the room. And as I've left the room, I'm looking behind me for my team, and they're not there. They forgot that we were going to use this negotiations tactic. And so they're all sitting there like shocked. What do we do? Is she coming back? So I'm furiously texting them, "Leave the room, get up now." So that had to be one of the most hilarious moments. And the IBM folks were completely shocked. My team was completely shocked. I was giggling my butt off around the corner. And then finally my team came out and said, "Next time, make sure you give us a sign." So by far, that's probably one of the most funny stories that I would say in my career.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that, Jill. And everyone, we've got our final poll up, so you will see that pop up in your Zooms here. It's around the question for whether or not your organization involves procurement at the right time, or if you believe that there would be a lot less issues if we got a seat at the table right away. So with that being said, I do have another question for Sherry here. So same question to you actually as above. What is your favorite part of supply chain or procurement, and why?
So I mirror Jill. I love the negotiation part. I think a lot of people get into procurement because they really enjoy that piece. Who doesn't love a good deal? I've touched on the fact that the procurement and supply chain industry is collaborative already, but it's also quite competitive. And I'm a wee bit competitive, so it's a good space for me to be in, because it gives me that ability to be both collaborative and competitive at the same time, and being able to negotiate feeds that part of me as well. I'd also say that I like that the diversity that it offers. No 2 days are the same. You know, you have to be agile, you have to be quick on your feet and be able to pivot. And you know, we touched on the firefighting. That's, you're going to have something hit you daily that needs your attention, and I love that. I just love the variety and the diversity that it provides.
Wonderful. I think all of us in procurement health share that very similar profile of just loving that thrill of the firefighting, the challenges that we overcome. Actually, I've got another question for you, Sherry. And right now, with everything that's happening and the global pandemic being what it is, you know, really, I think a lot of people can classify this time as a train wreck and a nightmare on a massive scale. So with a lot of things, you know, we really have to dig deep sometimes and find the positive and benefits in what is a seemingly negative challenge. And I know, Joseph, you shared those great stories about overcoming those massive challenges. What are, in your opinion, some of the positive impacts that COVID-19 has had on the supply chain industry and supply chain professionals?
Yeah, thanks. So I think, although we, as professionals in the industry, have always understood the business criticality of supply chain and the value that we can deliver, we've always understood that. But now the world knows that on a global scale, you know, supply chain and procurement is being talked about on a daily basis in media, government level, businesses. You know, so I think that's one piece that it's put a spotlight on us and the value that we can deliver. I think it's also helped our fight in having our business partners realize that cost is not king, right? And perhaps now it will be a little bit easier for us to sell the importance of risk mitigation and other value drivers, and taking the time to properly and thoroughly evaluate and qualify a supplier. I think those are all things that have maybe been a challenge, again, depending on who it is that you're working with in your organization, but it's definitely a talking point that comes up a lot. I think it was Joseph that touched upon some of these things with his the tsunami experience in Japan and how he was better prepared for COVID. So this is my first global pandemic type disaster. So it's definitely shined a light on, you know, those gaps and inefficiencies that we have in our supply chain, and provide you with an opportunity to look at, you know, how would I do things differently? Where have we fallen down? What are the learnings that I can take from this? You know, related to that is looking at your systems. I think the fact that cost is no longer king and all of that piece is also going to help drive an opportunity for procurement to no longer take that backseat when it comes to implementing software, digitization. I don't know about you guys, but throughout my career, I've always found that, you know, if it's looking at an ERP, for example, it's not built around the procurement and supply chain function. It's typically built around finance and manufacturing, and then the procurement and supply chain piece is tacked on at the end, right? So I think while we have the spotlight and while we have this platform, it's the time for us to leverage that and fight for solutions that are going to you know, resolve the pain points that we have. So looking at smaller, tailored, very specific solutions, which are most often than not very cost effective, whether that be small consulting firms or, you know, pieces of software that we can utilize within supply chain to help us do our jobs better, be more efficient, and be prepared for the next, whatever that disaster is that's going to hit us. Something will. So hopefully use this time and use the spotlight to get prepared.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Sherry. So we do have the poll results in from our second poll, and it is very positive to see that for the majority of folks on the audience, we are involved early as procurement, and it always works out better. Now, what I do like to see is that, you know, there is quite a bit of diversity in responses. So we have quite a few people who are saying that, you know, procurement are the rock stars, and we've always had a seat at the table, to everywhere from, you know, we've accepted that our role is a firefighter and we've adapted. So it just goes to show the diversity that still exists in our industry, which I think is what makes our industry so unique at a lot of the times. That's fantastic. So actually I have a question now from the registration, and I would like to direct this one to both yourself, Sherry, and Jill. Jill, maybe if you can start us off. So the question is really around COVID-19's pandemic. It's really accelerated digital transformation. And with the blockchain, is blockchain the solution in terms of better management of data and inventory from suppliers? If so, can you provide best steps to implement with varying degrees of technology enabled global companies? If not, then what would you believe is a forward-thinking way of assessing risk and resiliency in the supplier network?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a lot to unpack for a question. So I'm going to start with, so blockchain and AI. I think that one of the things that is a great benefit that's happened because of this crisis, it's horrible that's happened in terms of the toll on human lives and as well as livelihoods. But I do think that if there's a silver lining, it's the acceleration of technology and the enablement of that technology in business. I think people are becoming acutely aware that digital transformations that were talked about previously are now going to be accelerated because it's an imperative now. And I would say blockchain and AI in particular are going to be the technologies that are going to better enable the transparency as well as the accountability that's necessary. If you look at some of the lessons that we've learned because of the pandemic, whether it's the scarcity of critical PPE equipment, masks, visors, gowns, everything. If you think about the visibility that's necessary, even just the availability that would be available or visible in terms of the technology around AI and blockchain, you'd be able to better understand where shipments are, where your risks are within the supply chain on a much better scale with a greater level of transparency. So I think that it's probably not answering the entire question. You know, if you're going to look at the adoption of technologies, I think you have to be ready. Your organization has to be ready. I've heard a lot of people talk about blockchain. It was the buzzword for quite a while. AI is sort of the new buzzword that's been around for the last year, and how AI can be applied to supply chain and procurement. I would say first, before you actually look at any of the technologies and how they can enable your business, you really have to assess the readiness of your business and whether or not you're ready, your culture is ready, and whether or not the investment from a cost perspective is going to be mission critical for your business, and whether or not the return on the investment is going to be there. And if you do decide that it is, and I would again highly recommend that you seek out assistance from somebody who does have expertise in these areas, who can really help you. And maybe it's not a big approach, maybe it's more, where are the priorities within my organization, and maybe it's on those things that are mission critical to my business that I need to have that level of visibility. Direct spend versus indirect spend as an example. So that would be some of my advice. I'd love to hear from Sherry what she thinks as well.
I think you covered that really well, actually, Jill. I'd say I kind of touched on it a little bit already, talking about, you know, maybe looking at specialized, targeted, small solutions, depending on what your current pain points are. So definitely, you know, as Jill mentioned, evaluating the readiness and having a good understanding of what that is, because otherwise it's going to die in the water. And then depending on what it is, like I think the question was better management of data and inventory. So are you looking at TMS system, or do you want to measure more of the risk side? Or are you looking at an enterprise risk management system? There's so many different solutions available at varying scales. But similar to what Jill said, I would start small and baby step it. Don't go and make a huge investment with something that's not going to at the end of the day fill your need or get the right adoption. So I would start small, and even you've mentioned it's global. Maybe you start with a specific region where the pain point is the greatest, and use them as a pilot. Get some buy-in, get some ambassadors, and then expand it from there.
Wonderful. Thank you both for that. And we've got one more question from the audience. I'd like to direct this one to Larry and Joseph here. So the question is really, if you can share a situation where you've made a decision by yourself, and what was the immediate outcome of you making that decision, and how was it taken care of? Larry, you're on mute.
I can take this first. I haven't made any, or not that many, I guess, immediate decisions on my own, I guess. I guess one would be when I made a decision on kind of a strategy to take procurement. And I guess the decision isn't like without recourse. It's that it's typically, this instance of this strategy to use like an RFP mechanism, and not in the traditional sense of, hey, let's write a bunch of requirements and let's prescribe all the situations and scenarios so that the vendor can, or supplier community can jump through. I wanted to pursue a kind of a challenge-based procurement RFP where we put out the outcome that we want to achieve as an organization, and then we want the suppliers to kind of look at, hey, how can we help you achieve this outcome versus prescribing everything. And that was well received from some, and not well received from a lot of others. And I think the people that it resonated with are the people that I was catering to, or hoping that would take on this idea, or this type of RFP mechanism or RFP strategy, and it worked out.
Wonderful. Joseph?
Well, I have lots of examples, I guess, where I make a lot of decisions. One of them was to get up this morning. That
Awesome.
That said, I embarked on a transformation program about a year or so ago, which I felt needed to be done. Okay, and it was really coming in and looking at process, looking at tools, and really thinking through what are the underlying mechanisms that were going to help us to improve our supply chain. And so nobody told me to do that. I could have continued doing it the other way, but I knew that if we didn't do that, it was ultimately going to impact our earnings per share in a negative manner. And so if we want to really take a look at our cost to income ratio, you got to think about how are we actually going to do this. So I made sure that I stood up nobody told me to do it and not to do it. I went out there and I started a category management team. Okay, separate from my strategic sourcing team. I went out there and I said, okay, we've got to make sure that we're aligning and getting front to back transparency across our cost base. So we came up with a taxonomy, 4-level deep taxonomy, and implementing that. That is now starting to yield benefits in other parts of finance. So those are decisions that are strategically going to change the direction of what we're doing. What I do is I take on an annual basis and I look at what are the strategic plans for each of our business leaders, and then figure out how can we actually align with those, even at a very tactical level. So as an example, there will be times when people will tell you, well, you know what, we're trying to drive lowest price. And there are times that lowest price is not the strategy you should have. If you have a marketing campaign that's being launched, then the strategy should not be lowest price. The strategy should be a surety of supply. So if you have a launch date of, let's say, July 1st, and you get the best price on July 15th, you missed the strategy of the business and you're misaligned. So the decisions that I'm taking are how do we actually take information, transform it into intelligence? So I set up, nobody told me to do this. I made a decision. I created a data scientist group. We've used those data scientists to actually create a series of powerful dashboards that are enabling us to look across the ecosystem that is our supply chain. so that we can make decisions and provide insight into our executives. So my view is, how do I look at it from a systemic wide ecosystem perspective and make the decisions that others may not be willing to make, that are going to help to drive us for the, for the foreseeable future into a way that's going to optimize our cost base while reducing our risks, while ensuring that we're having an effective and efficient supply chain that is meeting the needs of the strategies of our businesses. So, I mean, I make those every day, and I think that I'm lucky because I'm at a senior enough level as a chief procurement officer to be able to drive that. So it's not about asking permission. It's about saying, how does this align with the overall strategic direction that we have as a bank, and let's just go and do it.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Joseph. And I think those are the types of decisions that drive us as an industry forward. Getting away from that procurement is the 10% people of, okay, these are the guys that just want to come and ask for 10% and those 10% cost reductions. What we always say with our clients is, look, even if we get you the world's best cost reduction now, if it puts your supplier out of business 6 months from now, that's not a sustainable solution. That's not what we're here to do. We're here to drive very sustainable business value for you as an organization. So that's wonderful to hear. So I'd love to wrap this up now with some best learning anecdotes from your early career lessons. I know we've got an amazing audience here. Some of them might be starting up in their supply chain journeys. You've all been on this journey for a while. So can you share some thoughts from early in the career, or something that you'd love to be able to, if you can go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would you say? What are some anecdotes that you'd love to share with your younger self there? And maybe let's start with Sherry, and then we'll go to Jill and Larry, and then Joseph.
Sure. So network, and network some more. I can't stress that enough, and I wish that I had recognized the value of your network early on in my career. I was very, very late to the game, but it's an absolute game changer. So stay active. It's not only for when you're in career transition, it's absolutely imperative that you continue to network effectively. Join associations, join groups, join cohorts, find your tribe. I've touched on the collaborative spirit of supply chain quite a few times. So people are generally really eager and open to helping. So don't be afraid to reach out. I would say jump in early and embrace AI and emerging technologies. Be bold, be courageous, feel the fear, and do it anyway. Because I think it's those people that are the first to jump on board that are going to get the greatest value. As far as career advancement goes, never turn down an opportunity, right? Especially if you feel that you might not have everything you need to do it. Give it a go, try it, learn as you go. And not everybody can know everything or do everything. So leverage your subject matter experts, and work upon building and developing your strengths, and leverage others around you to fill those gaps. And lastly, I would say don't underestimate the soft skills, which I think are actually going to become core skills moving forward, especially as automation and technological transformation continue to happen. So it's those communication skills, the empathy, EI. Those are going to be uber important as you move forward and move to more strategic application away from the tactical things that are going to be streamlined and automated.
Good.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I'll go next. So 30 years of experience. I've got a few tidbits of wisdom, hopefully. Sherry actually hit a lot that I think are really, really good. I would say that, always be open to opportunities. Don't set a course and ignore opportunities if they present themselves. I think the ability to actually embrace opportunities and pivot. I started out typing waybills in a warehouse. That was my first supply chain job when I was 21 years old. And it was through recognizing and building relationships outside of procurement and supply chain with other folks in functional areas, building relationships that I moved on to other areas that I didn't know that I was interested in, but opportunities came up. So, don't expect that your career is going to be a straight line. It's going to be zigzag, and you're going to make stops along the way that you may not necessarily have planned for, but that may actually be a great opportunity. I was at Manulife Financial. Within a month of my starting, I was told I was going to be part of the outsourcing team that outsourced the entire IT as well as the IT procurement team. So I started off thinking I was going to be a buyer. I was actually the manager for software, IT software, and ended up outsourcing myself to IBM and ended up becoming an expert in outsourcing, which I never even dreamt of. So, always be open, build relationships outside of procurement, outside of supply chain as much as you possibly can. Never stop learning. The soft skills, like Sherry said, are so critically important, and building relationships that are strong and trusting and enduring enabled me to start my own business. And it was because of those relationships with CFOs and CEOs and CIOs and COOs that I've been able to be successful. So be open, continuously learn, don't ignore the soft skills like Sherry said, and have fun. Just have a lot of fun.
Wow. Wow. So I'm going to go after Sherry and Jill that stole all my material already. So, no, I'm kidding.
Pivot, Larry, pivot.
All right. Well, yeah. Okay. So one thing I've learned from only being in the profession, or a number of roles in the profession, I guess, over the last 13, 14 years is be more uncomfortable if you can. If you are uncomfortable doing something, you're doing something right. Because that's the only area that you can really learn in. And that's what's driven myself out here in this world. I learned this probably maybe 18 months ago, I think, and really began to take action upon this idea to be uncomfortable in the last year or so. And I'm still learning, and it's been great. And I've definitely felt like I've failed in some instances, or at least had made some setbacks along my journey of learning. And yeah, that's one aspect. So being comfortable. The other aspect that's kind of building on the networking aspect that Sherry and Jill already alluded to was that, building a professional network is not about job opportunities or referrals to opportunity. It's really about how we can help each other or help others out to further their goals and objectives or trouble they're facing in their work or life, across personal or professional livelihoods, because people want to deal with people. And if I know that, somebody likes going to the zoo, and now the Toronto Zoo is doing this safari type thing where, you pack a car and you just drive around the Toronto Zoo, I'll let them know about this Toronto Zoo safari type adventure that they could go on. Because that's what's important to people, like people activities. What else? I think the other thing was probably that I've learned is that you don't know you can't do it until you've tried. So you can try something and not do it well, and that's okay. Being okay with, so-called failure is totally okay. There's a ton of things that I've tried and not been successful at. Selling insurance. I don't sell insurance very well. For some reason, relationship selling on that schema just doesn't work for me. So yeah, give it a shot. And, the only thing you can, learn from it is that that's not for you. But, and then you also have to find from others, where do you want to persevere and really try to dig deep and keep going, even if you're not good at it. And that's the hard part, I think, if you're trying something and it's not exactly working out. When do you keep going? When do you, say it's not for you? And having a good network of people, friends, family that can kind of help you, especially if they've done it. If they haven't done it, then their advice may not be so good for you. No, that's about it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Joseph?
Well, everything's been said, but in reality, have fun. I think if I go back and I look at my younger self, I spent a lot of time in the Army. And when I got out of the Army and went into supply chain, I think I was a little too rigid and a little too regimented, right? And so one of the things that I've learned over my profession is just to have fun, okay? And I laugh heartily every day with my team. Doesn't matter whether it's somebody who's fresh out of university or somebody who's been in it for 30 years like myself. And I also think that you have to pay it forward, where you have an opportunity to kind of take a look at what you're doing. Do that through managing your network. Help out wherever you can. And I try and do that as much as I possibly can. And you have to give back to your profession, and you have to continually be educated. I'll give you an example. I'm finishing a professional certification this week in third-party risk management. I'm the CPO. I don't necessarily have to do that, but I felt like it was the right thing to do to show the example to others. Okay, and so I think that that's important to be able to do that. And I think Albert Einstein said it best when he said, you have to be curious. Always be curious, be thinking about what you're going to do. So if I had to go back and talk to my younger self, to say, hey, don't take yourself so seriously. Just go with how you're actually going to help others, drive the outcomes that you want. Make sure that you still have a strong point of view, because I have a very definite point of view about things, but that doesn't mean that I'm always right, though I am seldom wrong. And be globally mobile. In my career, I've worked in Brazil, I've worked in Argentina, I've worked in China, I've worked in Japan, I've worked in Korea, Saudi Arabia. I've worked all over the world, okay? And I'm telling you, you get a different perspective when you have a global view. And guess what? Your career kind of goes like this, and it takes you up. Because there are very few people at my level that have worked and lived in other regions and can have a different perspective. And I think that is absolutely important. So it comes down to the networking, to be a globally mobile person, to be able to drive and have a strong point of view. But I'll close by saying that as I started to have fun, you got to just laugh, make fun of yourself, and it's not being self-deprecating, but rather just just genuinely kind of say, wow, I can't believe what I did, or to work with others. It's just an easier way to have a life.
Absolutely. I think that's wonderful. And I want to just close off with a big, big thank you to all of our panelists. Hearing your stories, always so great for a procurement nerd to geek out about, find their tribe, and really geek out about all the things that we love about procurement and this amazing, amazing profession that we have. So that being said, Sarah, I will pass it back to you to close us out.
All right, Jane, you kept us exactly on track. I've got 60 seconds left. So again, on behalf of RSN and our sponsors, thank you for attending our Procurement Talk. Again, this is a monthly series. Our next event will be on July 9th at 1 Eastern Time. Susan Walsh, the classification guru, will be moderating another panel. And again, a big, big thank you to our moderator, Jane, and to our speakers here today. I think one of the things that I really took away from this is the power of collaboration and community. And all 5 of you are doing that by giving back and sharing your insights and viewpoints with your peers. So with that, I thank you. This has been recorded. We will be sharing this online. So if you have questions or didn't get to take down all your notes, you will be able to listen to the recording as we release it next week. So have a wonderful afternoon or evening, and hopefully you can join us for our Procurement Talk next month.
Thank you.
Thank you.